Internet leads can work and that everybody's results will be different. The key is.
Hey there, this is Vlad Cherchenko. Welcome to the Insurance Sales Lab podcast. My guest today for today's conversation is going to be Andrew Filar. Andrew Filar is a Allstate agent out of Georgia. Andrew, thank you for hopping on. How are you today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, I'll do a quick background of you and we're going to jump right into it.
Sure.
So, 13 years in the insurance business, 7 years as an agency owner. You have 40 team members and your book size is about 45 million and you
Yep.
write about 600, 700,000 a month in P&C premium. Is that right?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Cool. So you have a big operation, and I want this conversation to be helpful for bigger agencies as well as those who are just starting off. And ultimately, what I want to unpack is how to work internet leads successfully. You have grown your agency organically. You've picked up a few books here and there, but if I'm not mistaken, 90% of your book of business, 45 million, came from you acquiring that business just organically.
Yeah. So
But
we've purchased about maybe 10 million of that 45 over the years, and we've sold some premium off as well. But you're right. Most of that has come from internet leads.
yep, and some of it came from requotes, referrals, but
Of course.
internet leads has been the secret sauce for your growth, and it also has been the way that we've grown our agency. And a lot of times when agents buy leads, they hope that they convert at the highest rates. And really, the one metric that agents look at is conversion rates.
For
If,
sure.
if my leads convert at a certain rates, I'll continue buying them. If they don't, then I'm going to shut them down. I want to go a little deeper and ask a few questions around how you look at measuring success with internet leads. And for everyone who's watching, we'll bounce from topic to topic, but after today's conversation, you should have a very clear perspective on how to measure success when working internet leads. And for those who don't know, Andrew runs Next Call Club. If you go to nextcallclub.com, a lot of the things that we talk about today, Andrew helps agents with. So to kick things off, Andrew, open-ended, how should an agent measure success when buying internet leads? How do you know things are going well and when changes need to be made?
So when measuring success on internet leads, it's important to understand what your actual goal is, because the answer of what the best metric is or what the primary metric is going to depend a lot on like the goals for the agency. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, let's say that you are a captive agent or maybe even an independent agent and you have a year-end bonus or a profit sharing opportunity at the end of the year. And a lot of times these are based on new business production or new business growth or something to that nature. And
Mhm.
so for some people, it really is about how do I get as much production as possible out of these leads, right? And in which that case, conversion rate or sold rate, maybe for lack of a better term, because I think conversion rate gets thrown out there, and conversion rate can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So if it really is about getting the most out of your leads, it really comes down to what is your conversion rate, right? How do I get the most out of the leads that I'm buying? And then this idea of cost per sale or cost per acquisition, because you only have a finite or a limited marketing budget. So if you can spend, $10,000 or $40,000, doesn't really matter. That's your budget. So if we say within this amount of marketing, how much business can I get? So maybe it's that. Now, if you are an agency that's maybe like a little bit more mature in the stage where you're not trying to grow as much or you're not chasing a year-end bonus, which I think to a lot of people seems crazy. It's where I am today. Like I've kind of matured my agency. I've actually slowed growth a little bit. So my primary metric is return on investment. And so for other people, they might say, well, this conversion rate isn't any good. And I might say, yeah, but like if your ROI or return on investment is really good, we might have to redefine what good looks like. And so there's a lot to it. And what I always tell people is that there's really like kind of three or four primary metrics that I look at when it comes to internet leads. The first one is contact rate. If you buy 100 leads, how many of them are you making contact with? How many actually answer the phone and are who the lead says it is? So if somebody picks up the phone and says, I want you to take me off your list, that's still a contact. Another piece is quote rate. Okay. So we say, how many of these leads are we actually quoting? So if we get by 100 leads, get 40 on the phone, right? Our kind of number is 35 to 40% contact rate is where we like to live. And then we say, well, how many of those 40 contacts are we getting to actually take a quote. For us, we want to be in that.
Those who answered or of the leads that were purchased?
Right. So this is a good question, right? So if we say we had 40 people who answered the phone and we got 20 people to take a quote, okay? So that would be a 20% quote rate on the 100 leads you bought, or a 50% answer to quote rate. Okay.
Mhm.
So these are kind of the benchmarks, right? So contact rate, we want to be in that 35 to 40%. Quote rate, Peachy Insurance has been around 17 to 22% this year. On Next Call Club, we see a range of 15 to 18%, kind of depending on the state, with some people much higher, a couple people, unfortunately, a little bit lower. Answer to quote rate on the piece that you've brought up, we have a minimum expectation of 50%. A lot of agencies are in the 20, 30%. They're getting just kind of stuffed with objections and not overcoming them. And then we think about like kind of the actual performance metrics. We think about like what is quote to close, right? So if we actually quote them, how many of them are turning into a sale? And then we get to the actual sold rate. If we buy 100 leads, how many are turning into a sale? And so if we think about quote to close, that is going to be different for every state. We are sitting at like 9 to 11% in Georgia right now. We're sitting at 15 to 17% in Tennessee, where we also have Tennessee. So it depends on the state. And then conversion rate, sold rate, again, that's going to depend on a lot of things, but it's important to look at this whole picture. And the reason I say this is because say you have a lead that is, quote to close at 20%, which for me is double. But if I'm only quoting 8% of them, my overall sold rate or my overall conversion rate is going to look pretty poor. And the way you solve these problems for each of these metrics are different. So, that is kind of how I look at lead performance, right? But again, if you are focused on ROI, your choice might be is like, how do I just buy the cheapest leads possible? Because that's going to ideally drive the most return so long as I can get them on the phone and actually sell them. So happy to go much deeper on any of those things, but that's kind
Yeah.
of like the lay of the land.
Yeah. So let's go just one layer deeper. We're going to work with a $10 lead. Is that fair?
Let's do a $10 lead. Let's do it.
$10 lead. We're going to solve for cost per contact.
Okay.
If the target is 35 to 40%, let's just say 35%. Is that
Sure.
fair?
Let's do it. 35%.
So we're going to take 10 divided by 0.35.
Correct.
And that gives us a $28 cost per contact.
Correct.
And then from those who answer, we should shoot for at least half of those we should quote. So let's multiply that by 2 or divide it by 0.5.
0.5. Yep.
Yep. So we're looking at $57 cost per quote.
Yep.
Yep. So cost per quote. And then from there, how good is your sales team? Are they closing 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people? I think a safe number would be if you're working internet leads, these are people who are actively shopping.
Yep.
Anything less than 25% close rate is a sales skill problem, or it's a follow-up problem once you have the initial sales conversation. So once you get someone to a point where you've presented the price, you should be closing at least a quarter of them. Do you agree with that?
I think I'd push back a little bit. And the
Okay.
reason I say that is because like I know just from you and I having a relationship, working together over the years, collaborating on things, like I think the way that you measure a conversation can be different from a lot of other people, right? So I think for you, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're measuring a sales conversation by people going over maybe a certain amount of time or hitting a certain number of talking points based on the scorecard, right? So what you're
Yeah,
not
10-minute
doing.
conversation. If somebody has a 10-minute
Yeah.
conversation, that means they were likely eligible. Anybody less than 10 minutes, they probably weren't eligible for anything that we offer.
Right. So I think like if we delineate those two things, so like you do that in your office, which I think is really good. Like we've looked at this in the past that we called like quality conversations as a way to do it. When I'm looking at something in aggregate, a lot of times like 10 to 15% is kind of the number that we see because there might be some people who aren't eligible. There might be
Okay.
some people who don't get to full 10 minutes. And again, I do think geography matters. And I think there are going to be some states where close rates are significantly higher. And I think there's going to be some states where close rates are significantly lower. I do think like now this is something like I will say about like my team is I think that we are very much focused on speed, right? So
Mhm.
like sometimes we will let go a prospect that we might have been able to close, but we feel like it might be too much work to get there. And the actual optimal solution is to say, look, let's actually like kind of X date them, put them on a drip, move
Mhm.
on, and we'll get to that next conversation that we can actually get to close quite a bit faster. And so, I always tell people like our close rate at Peachy Insurance is oftentimes slightly depressed to other agents, but we still will write a lot more business because we are focused on speed and volume, and in a lot of cases, brute force. And I think part of it is our mix as well. So I think that there is no one right or wrong number, and I think all of these things do work together because, to your point, Vlad, like if you're working a $10 lead, you need to have a much better quote to close because it's a $10 lead. For
Yeah.
me,
And if it's a $5 lead, it changes the game.
correct, exactly. So like my average cost per lead is about $6, right? So if I'm sitting at 10 to 12 or 13% quote to close, where basically our math is coming out to be the same at the end of the day in cost per sale, ROI, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a great example. And I think like kind of the back and forth between the two of us shows that it is not a one size fits all solution. And it really, every single data point is a different lever that we can pull to
Yeah.
create efficiency.
Yeah. And on our end, this is where we differ a little bit
Yeah.
on the sales side. If someone is showing some interest in moving forward with us, we're not going to force them to switch over, but we will call them the second, third, fourth time to follow up with them until they tell us that, look, I'm not interested.
Right.
And a lot of times it's by making those follow-up calls that we end up getting the sale. Whereas in other agencies, they might give up on that a bit sooner because the prospect isn't showing any obvious signs that they want to move forward.
Right.
Whereas we will follow up, present different quotes, change deductibles, and see if we can close the business. So we go a bit further with the follow-up process. But just to kind of finalize the cost per sale here, if we're going to go with say a 15% close rate,
Yep.
and our cost per quote is $57, we're going to do divided by 0.15. So
Right.
$57 divided by 0.15. That gives us a cost per acquisition of $380. Some people look at that and say, well, I can't afford to do that. But that's where you got to look at, okay, if you had a producer close one deal a day, one household a day over the course of a month, say it's 20 households that you closed, and that equates to 50,000 in premium. Once you pay them their base, their commission, how much do you have left over? Well, if you have $4,000 left over, you do 4,000 divided by 20 deals. That becomes your cost per sale budgets. So for every agency, that's where the math can really differ. But one metric that I think is important to look at here is cost per lead. If we just take our cost per lead from $10 down to $7, well, now our cost per acquisition went from 380 to, take 30% off, $266.
Right.
So you do 380 times 0.7. Now we're looking at a $266 cost per acquisition.
All else equal, right? Like
All
that's
else equal.
yeah, and that's assuming no close rate degradation, no quote rate degradation, right? Everything stays the same. So but sometimes it is possible, right? And I think like at Next Call Club, that's like what we do with the people who buy leads from us is, we are actively trying to lower bids without affecting quality. And it doesn't mean that it's always possible, but sometimes it is. And I think to your point, you talk about this $380 can feel like a lot of money. And I hear that a lot. And so people sometimes will say to me, well, what's a good cost per acquisition? Like, what should my cost per acquisition be? And the real answer is that it depends on your economics. It depends on how you get paid. It depends on, the retention, long-term retention, right? So I always tell people there's like a rule of thumb. If you are in most of the country and you are a Farmers or an Allstate agent, you can probably live with a $400 cost per sale and be in pretty good shape. And you could probably even go a little higher than that and still be in great shape. If you are in Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and maybe there's like one or two more like really like high premium states, you can withstand like a $600 to $700 cost per sale. Granted, leads tend to cost more money in those states, right? Because there's more competition, because the premium is high, and maybe close rate is even lower. I know Texas is very tough right now. So I always tell people like that's a rule of thumb, but the real answer, and like one of the things I talk about when I do one-on-one consulting with agents, is that it's about understanding what's the lifetime value of that customer. How long does it take you to break even on that customer? What is your ROI on that customer? Because if you have a 10-year customer life and it takes you 2 years to break even on an $800 cost per sale, who cares? You have 8 years of
Yeah.
profit in the long run insurance is a residual game. I think it's the same thing with ROI. Like I was talking to somebody and they had a 550% ROI. And I was like, hey, like you should pour more money. And they're like, yeah, but like every time I do that, my results go down. And I said, you shouldn't care because even if you're at 300% ROI or 250% ROI, you're still getting more than you had before. You're making great money. And so it's easy to look at these like really nice numbers, low cost per sale or high ROI. But if you have a really high ROI, you are probably leaving growth on the table.
Yeah. One question I want to ask you is around what do you view as a good break-even point? And I know it's different
Yeah.
for a new agent versus a seasoned agent with a book of business. But first, one other caveat I want to add here is that for farmers agents, Allstate agents, if you sell a certain amount in premium on a monthly basis, you have the opportunity to earn more that month. Specifically with farmers insurance, we have the new business accelerator bonus where you can double your commission. So if you normally make 9% on auto, you can now make 18. If you're making normally 12% on home, you can now make 24%. And by maximizing that bonus every single month and hitting your production targets, that's what allows you to have a $400 or $500 cost per sale target. Because a lot of people who are listening to this will say, there's no way I can afford to spend $500 to acquire clients. And that may be true if you're not hitting your max bonus, if you're just getting your 9% on auto, 12% on home. So that's another thing to keep in mind is you have to max out your bonus consistently every single month. And so going back to that question, what do you suggest would be a good break-even points on cost per sale should be? Is it that same month? Is it the first renewal, second renewal? How do you view that?
When we're looking at a break-even point, you raise a really good point about how agents get paid. So I think, like I, a lot of times ballpark, 20 to 22% new business for farmers, right? Assuming they're hitting kind of that monthly accelerator. Allstate, usually they're around 25% with like their accelerator. I know a lot of State Farm agents are around like 9 to 11% new business, and independents a lot of times are like 15, right? So depending on what you are getting paid at the front end will drastically change what a good break even is for you. And so, and rightfully so. But when we think about this idea of like what's a good break even period, I always try to tell people in most cases, being under a 3-year break even all in, right? Marketing, technology, staff, commission, everything. A 3-year break even for a lot of people is solid, not great, but solid. If you can get below one, you're really doing amazing. And I would actually encourage, like, if you were like my client, I'd be like, I encourage you to pour more money on the fire and grow more. But there are caveats, right? So I think one of the things to think about is how does customer lifetime work? And so, you and I are doing math here that like is very very comfortable to us. And I think it's not going to be as comfortable for everybody. But another quick piece of math that we can do is how do we derive what a customer's lifetime is? And so basically what we do is we take 1 divided by 1 minus the retention rate. So basically, if your retention is 80%, you would do 1 divided by 0.20. So 1 minus 0.80 is 0.20. So a good kind of quick math is an 80% retention rate is a 5-year customer life. A 90% retention rate is a 10-year customer life. And so what's important to understand is that 1 point of retention at the top is worth significantly more than 1 point of retention at the bottom. It's an exponential curve. And so if you have 70% retention, you're at a 3.3-year customer life. If you're at 92.5% retention, you're at a 15-year customer life or thereabouts. So it depends. So when my retention was 88% 3 years ago, I was scaling. Okay. So I was in scale mode. We were probably writing closer to $1 million in premium every month. My marketing spend was almost double what it is today. And I was running about a 1.5-year break even. And I was stoked because at 88% retention, I had almost an 8-year customer life. That's 6.5 years of profit. And you're writing almost $1 million in premium. Like that snowballs. And it's one of the reasons I've been able to get profitable today. Now, after taking a double-digit rate increase on auto, I think it's something like 2.5 years every 6 months. We've taken 20% rate increases now for the 3rd year in a row. My retention's 80%. So I have a 5-year customer life. So now my break even, my goal is 6 months.
Mhm.
I have a 0.5 break even target, so 6 month break even target.
You
And
want one renewal in auto when you break even. So you
correct.
acquire the client today, you might lose a little bit of money, but in the next renewal, you got to break even.
Correct. Exactly. That is our target. And we've been hit that most of this year. There's been some months where we've added staff or like we've had a low month where like we've been at 1.1 or 1.2, but because the retention's dropped, the break even point drops as well. So, I think what I always try to optimize for is how many years of profit do we have? And you should try to get 4 to 5 years of profit at least when we're doing this calculation. And I know this feels like a lot of math. It's not as complicated if you have the right pieces put together. And it's something I help people with. So
Okay. So let's, because I think this is so important and not many people break down the math in this way, I'm going to just give one more example of calculating what good should look like as far as quote rates.
sure.
Again, working with a $10 lead, instead of putting in contacted target, and then based on how many people answer, we establish a goal for quoted. A simple way to look at that is 20%-ish of all the leads that you buy, you should be able to quote. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say that if you are at 20%, you are in the top 10 percentile
Okay.
or the 90th percentile. Excuse me.
Okay. Yeah. So,
You're in the
so
top 10%.
20% would be considered amazing. What would you say is fair?
I would say fair is like 11 to 12%. And I'd say good is 15 to 17.
Right. 11 to 12% is fair.
You
Good, you
would be
said, what was that?
surprised how many agents data we look at that are running 10 to 11%, big name agents, huge producing agents. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes that's happening because their team is not overcoming objections. Sometimes it's because the lead quality is not good. And sometimes, in my opinion, I'm not dogging it, but sometimes they're sending all of their best leads offshore to like kind of like poorly trained offshore
Yeah.
callers, right? And that can compress these numbers.
Yeah. So fair would be 11 to 12, good 15, 17. If you can get 20 and above, that's considered to be fantastic. Is that right?
That's right. And there is a caveat here. There are a couple vendors out there, a couple publishers, vendors, whatever you want to call them, right? Vendor, if an agent can buy directly, a publisher, if they cannot, that will put out a lead that's, 20, 30, $40 and quotes at 40 to 50%. Like those leads do exist.
Yeah. So that's the next point of the puzzle, right? Is
Right.
even if you have a lead that's $30, but you're quoting 50% of them and you're closing a decent amount of these people, then that could be your best lead vendor. So cost per lead is not always the most important part of this equation. You have to look at cost per lead. If you got to look at quote rates, and then from those that you quote, how many of those are you able to close? So how do you track that data? So with Ricochet, the phone system that we use, it shows us our contacted, it shows us our quote rates. For people who are not Ricochet users, what do you recommend that they do?
So there's a couple options. You can get on YouTube and, you know, do some tutorials on Excel, export your data, learn how to make some pivot tables and track all of these things manually. And I think that's probably where I think a lot of people start, if they're trying to build it themselves. And then I think when you start doing that and you start to understand how valuable these insights can be, is I think a lot of people will take the next step and hire a data analyst. So maybe they hire somebody who's right out of school, kind of train them up. In some cases, they're hiring somebody maybe from South America or overseas, who's already trained because they can get some extra leverage there. But what I would say is that that's where a lot of people start. Or you can outsource it. So you can hire a company to do this for you. So like we do this for agents. So we'll take people's data, we'll visualize it as a dashboard. I know you've got something, maybe it's part of Insurance Sales Lab, where you help people kind of look at some data. There is Little Giant Marketing out there, there's Lead Swami out there. And so this idea is that you can either build it yourself, you can take it, put it in Excel, and do a bunch of research on what are the metrics to look at, how do we calculate those metrics, how do we clean these things up. Maybe you hire an analyst, or you can just hire somebody to do it for you.
Yeah. I mean, the easiest thing to do is to hire somebody, but I think agents need to also understand how to do not all of it yourself, but at least how to ask good questions. So I'll include a link below this video for people to download a very simple Excel file where they can, at the very least, plug in the name of the lead vendor and how much they spent in terms of marketing, and then how many households they closed. And just by having those two metric points and nothing else, you'll be able to see what your cost per sale was. So if you put in the total spent and how many households you closed, that'll give you your cost per sale right
Yep.
there for
Cost
that
per
lead
sale,
vendor.
cost per household, same thing.
Yep. So at the very least, that's a good starting point. If you want to get deeper into it, what's the contact rate, what's the quote rates, that's where you can get a little bit more complicated if your phone system and CRM don't talk to each other. But my recommendation for everybody who's on this call, go to nextcallclub.com, book a call with Andrew's team. They did that for me not too long ago, where I gave them my information, and they came back and said, okay, for the entire year, here's been your contact rate, quote rate. Here's how it compares to the last 90 days. Here's it compares to different states that you write in. So it's very, very helpful information. I appreciate you guys doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually just rolled out a new product basically yesterday. We haven't even really like announced it yet, so this might be the first announcement, but we have like a dashboard and analytics product. And and for some people it's overkill. It's it can be $1,000 to $2,000 a month. It's 13 different dashboards, ways to see it. But some people don't need all that. So we rolled out something that is around $250 a month that we take your ricochet data and we can look at like what is your speed to lead, what are your best and worst zip codes, and then a couple other metrics around like cost per sale things for $250 a month for ricochet users only. It's that price just because we have everything built. So, if somebody needs something like that, we have something quick, easy, and affordable as well. Doesn't have to be the Mac Daddy Cadillac of data analytics.
Dang. All right. I'm signing up today. Let me make a note.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add is I think data is important. Everybody likes data. I think not a lot of people are privy or keen on getting the data to where it needs to be to make it usable, and that's okay. That's not everybody's strength. It's not my strength. I have data analysts, but I think it's also important to your point when you say ask good questions. It's we have to ask why. Data is not the end all be all. And I hear people say this. I was like, oh, well, I got rid of that zip code because I didn't have any sales. But if your sample size isn't good enough, well, that matters. If you have 12, of your 100 leads in that zip code are currently sitting in like a quoted or waiting to be sold status, well, the question is like if one or two of them sell, is that now one of your best zip codes? So there's so many layers to this to making informed decisions. And I think like you're really good at it. I think we're good at it. And I think that can be the value of using a vendor is they help you not only get the data, but interpret the data. And that helps you learn over time. So if you do hire somebody, like to anyone listening, if you do hire somebody, make sure you're asking them to teach you how to think about it because that's going to be important for you over time too. It's just going to accelerate your ability to find efficiencies.
So how do you recommend that we reach out to lead vendors? So Next Call Club provides leads. You guys
We
do
do.
not just leads, but you also help tracking of the performance of the leads, and not just the Next Call Club leads, but other lead
Yeah.
vendors as well. But for agents who want to reach out to the other lead vendors that they work with,
Sure.
what questions should they ask them, and how should they communicate with them to get better results?
When you are reaching out to your lead vendors, some questions to ask, right? We can probably put these into like two different buckets. We can say, hey, before you work with them, and here are the questions while you are working with them. So if we say before you're working with them, I think I ask a lot of questions, or I used to ask a lot of questions when I was just kind of going out to vendors. It was this idea of being like, okay, are you using Journaya or Trusted Form, which are pieces of technology that ensure that the consumer is opting in? So if the consumer is opting in, you're having TCPA consent, you're not running into legal issues, assuming that you're doing everything right on your side of the ball here. But what it also does is if you don't have a Journaya token or a trusted form on it, it can signal that there's low intent or that they don't really have a good handle on where the leads are coming from. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is asking them, and this is not a deal breaker by any means, but saying, do you have any owned and operated sites? Because if they don't have any owned and operated sites, what that means is that they are buying leads and reselling them from somebody else, which is what Next Call Club does, right? So there's no part of me that's like dogging that. We have 30 different lead generators that we work with that we're sifting through on behalf of the agent so they don't have to have 30 vendors, right? You can get a lot of volume, can sift through the quality, get different things. So there's no problem, but it can help you understand the questions to ask. Because if somebody has no owned and operated forms, we could say, okay, well, if I give you data back, how do we improve it? Do I have it returns? And I think returns are another thing. Some places will allow returns, some places will not. Next Call Club, we only allow returns in like the first 30 to 60 days for certain things. And sometimes people will ask me a question. They'll say, well, why can't you give me returns? My other company gives me returns. And basically what I say is that at the end of the day, the cost of the lead is the cost of the lead. So if I'm getting you a lead for 6 and you want to return 20% of them, well, now I need to charge you $7.20. And the person that's giving you 20% returns might be charging you 9. So at the end of the day, it's here or there. Now, what I would tell you is that you should give the company your quote unquote returns, regardless of whether or not they give you credits, because that is telling them what is working and what's not. And so you should give all of your data, but at a minimum, give your returns. So let's say that we did all of that. You've been working with them and we say, okay, like, well, performance isn't good. How do we handle that? Okay. So the first thing I would ask is I would say, when's the last time that they reviewed your data and went over your account? Because a lot of people have this idea in their head that people give you the best leads when you start and then they mix in all the junk. It's like a bait and switch. And what I would say is that 90% of the time that's just that's just wrong. You know, it's just not true. I think the reality of what actually happens is that competitiveness changes, traffic sources change, maybe they've spun up some new websites, they've taken down some websites and things have changed, but because you have given no data as the agent or the customer, they can't make it better for you without the feedback. And so if you give them the data and then you say, hey, let's look at this, performance isn't good. What can we do? So we could say, hey, are there any back-end sources or back-end traffic that you can eliminate that's not giving us what we need? That's the first thing. The second thing we could say is, okay, well, this is what's changed on our side. Maybe we've taken a rate increase. Maybe other companies have taken a rate increase. Maybe RMPs have changed. What are we seeing? Okay. And so I think part of it is saying, like, what are the actual numbers and can you change some back end sources? But part of it is also us giving them, hey, here's what's working, here's what's not, but here's also the RMPs. Here are the rate increases. What filter levers do we have to try to back into this? And so, like, sometimes the filter is not the end all be all, but we could say something like, well, I can't write a home if it's over $1 million in premium on dwelling. Well, dwelling is not a question that gets asked on a home insurance lead form. And if it was, would the customer even pick the right thing? They'll probably just pick what the home would sell for, not necessarily rebuild cost. But if we know that we can probably ballpark it based on a square footage number, we can back into it on a square footage filter. And so I think what it's about is trying to invite that vendor in as somebody who can help you solve the problem. And it starts with just having like regular communication with that vendor.
Okay, amazing. Now let's go back to when you're signing up with the lead vendor. You can ask this question at that time or when you're actively working with them, the Germania or trusted form. Can you elaborate on what that means? And we'll put some pictures
Yeah.
and on the screen here to better illustrate that. And is a good question to ask them, can you only send me leads that go through that process?
So what I would say is a Journaya and a trusted form, for lack of a better term, I know they're kind of like these obscure kind of words, is that it's just a snippet of code that gets put on the lead generator's website. And what it is doing is it is creating like a digital paper trail of all types of things. Like, did they actually click the box that says, I consent to be called? Was that language adequate? And it can go even deeper, right? Like, so something we can see is like, how much time did they spend filling out the form? Was it 30 seconds or was it 6 minutes? And I bet, most of us could agree that somebody spends 30 seconds filling out the form has less intent than somebody who spends 6 minutes filling out the form. Now, that's not always true. If you start getting like into the lead space and understanding that like a lead can jump through 4 or 5 different hoops before it gets to you, doesn't necessarily mean 5 people have it, but it means that it moved through all these vendors. These numbers can be a little deceptive, but it's just basically a snippet of code that is a digital breadcrumb that tells us a lot about the consumer's behavior, which can then help us try to predict lead quality and lead behavior when it comes time to actually call them.
Okay. And can you request that they send you leads that only have gone through that process and not anything else?
What I would tell you is you can ask them to only include leads that have a Journia token or a trusted form. And what I would say is that most of the big ones, EverQuote, Smart Financial, all web leads, we can name all the big ones. They are going to have them on pretty much everything at this point. But sometimes there are smaller niche companies that you've never heard of. Maybe somebody's never heard of Next Call Club. And
Mhm.
people will ask us that question. We say, yes, we keep consent on file. We have a token or a URL, sometimes both, and we take TCPA compliance very seriously. So, there's this thing that always gets said, like in business, and I think it's true. I think it's been true for hundreds of years that if you do what everybody else is doing, if you buy your leads from the same place that everybody else is buying from, like you're probably never going to be at the very, very top. Because if you're just doing what everybody else is doing, you're probably going to be kind of in that middle, maybe middle top. Maybe you're at the top, but it's going to be very hard to become great doing what everybody else does.
Mhm.
So, you might have to find new lead providers out there. And so if you get to a smaller lead provider, you should be asking this question, especially if they're not a publicly traded company like Lending Tree is, Quote Wizard, like EverQuote is, like Smart Financial is, et cetera, et cetera.
Now you can buy the best leads and you can have the best sales team. But there is another component here that may feel like it's out of your control, but there are some things that you can do to take control over this. And this is your numbers coming back as spam. So you might be making outbound
Yeah.
calls and not having anybody pick up the phone, or having 1 out of 100 calls that you make pick up. And that's because certain carriers have your phone number flagged as spam. So talk to us about that. First, how do we know if our numbers are being marked as spam? And two, what do we do about that?
Spam is a battle, man. Spam is a battle. I think it's going to continue to get harder and harder. And so if somebody is listening and they are making outbound calls, even if it's not on leads, it's on their own customers, they should have a solution for spam. Okay. So that's like the first thing I'll say is that we've all seen our phone ring and it say scam likely, spam likely, telemarketer. There's different iterations of this. Do you pick up the phone? Like, do you pick up the phone?
No, I don't.
Right. I don't. I've actually started picking up the phone. I got this from my business partner, Peter. And I'll just say, hey, do you know you're flagging spam? Like, we can fix that for you, And they're like, like you're almost like pitching a
Nice.
telemarketer. So like my business partner, Peter, did that and we were laughing. And so, we did that. So here's what I'd say about spam. If you are flagging spam, you are dead on arrival.
Uh,
You're dead on arrival. So we were talking a lot about contact rate. In contact rate, we talked about this idea. If you buy 100 leads, 35 to 40 of them, 35 to 40% contact rate. We also use this metric called answer rate, which is slightly different. So we say if you make 100 calls, how many people pick up the phone? And so we want to see this number ideally in like kind of like the 8 to 10% range. If you're, in the 6 to 8 range, like you're probably still like okay, but you're trending down.
Answer rates 8 to 12% after how many calls?
I would say like I think don't take that
Aggregate.
piece out of it. If you're
Okay.
making 100 calls,
Okay.
you're
I got
getting
it.
8 to 12 people to pick up the phone, right? So if you are in the 6 to 8% range, you're still okay, but maybe you're calling like an older lead or something that's been called a bunch of times. Like answer rate is literally like it's like a snapshot, like a balance sheet. You make 100 calls, how many pickups did we get?
Basically 1 out of 10, roughly speaking.
Correct. 1 out of 10. I always say 1 out of 8 to 12, right?
Okay.
So now if you are at like 1 to 3%, you are very likely flagging spam. And I always do this math and say, look, if you're at a 10% answer rate, you're getting one pickup every 10 calls. If you're at a 3%, you're getting one pickup every 30 calls. You cannot win if you're getting one pickup on 30 calls and you're burning your leads. You're burning your leads. So what I always tell people is how do you know you're flagging spam? Well, there's the old fashioned way, make 30, 40 calls and see how many people pick up and what percentage is that. You could use a company like Caller ID Reputation or Number Verifier. It's relatively cheap. It allows you to put your phone numbers in and it will tell you if you're flagging spam on the three major carrier networks such as T-Mobile, Verizon, or AT&T. You can then, if you flag spam, you can go remediate it directly to the company. So there's a list of websites which maybe you and I can connect on, and you can put them in the show notes. I won't say them because they're super long names. And you can register your numbers. You have to prove that that you are a business and that you own these numbers. And if you're a captive carrier, you can do it, right? Even if you're on like a company a company phone system. But if you flag spam, it could take 1, 2, 3 weeks to get it off spam, and then you can flag again in a day. So what you have to do is you have to swap numbers. Okay. So then there's like some people will do this, they'll monitor and they'll remediate. And some people are making so many outbound calls, they'll literally hire a virtual assistant to just do this every day. Right. That is an option that you can hire a virtual assistant whose only job is to just register your numbers. You got to do the math on what the hourly rate is, everything like that. You can also go out and buy a spam solution. So we offer it through Next Call Club. It is about $50 per number per month. And what I always tell people is that sometimes it makes sense to go through us. Sometimes it makes sense to go directly to a company. The reason that sometimes it makes sense to go through us rather than directly to a company is because a lot of times the minimum spend with these companies is $1,000 a month. Like one of the companies is $30,000 a year and it has to be paid in one payment, not payments, not quarterly, not monthly, one check for $30,000. And if somebody has 4 or 5 phone numbers, they don't need $1,000 a month. If somebody like yourself, who maybe has 20 people making outbound calls, it might make more sense for you to go direct. And I think we've had this conversation where I said, you've asked me about it, and I'm like, it might make more sense for you to go direct, Vlad, because it might just have the control and the cost is similar. So, I think there's levels to this. You can monitor and then remediate. It's very reactive, but it's better than doing nothing. You can be proactive and have what's called spam monitoring um, and remediation, and depending on the company, there's different price points. Like there are some that are a couple $100, but they check your phone numbers once a week, rather than once a day. And there's some companies that check every day at 9 a.m. And there's some companies that check it continuously because they're API'd in. So the moment it flags, we're getting a notice. And so what I would say here is like we have 5 different companies in our tech stack. So people say, hey, like which company do you use for spam remediation on Next Call Club? And I said, we have 5 because we have monitoring, we have remediation, we have white labeling, and we have caller ID branding, which is like a whole nother level. So like we use caller ID branding on every outbound call at Peachy Insurance.
Can you explain what branding is?
Yep. So when we call, the phone will say Peachy or Peachy Insurance when we call them.
Does it have the emoji in there as well for
It
Peachy?
doesn't. It doesn't. And because the technology is limited. And I supposedly Apple has it coming, but basically the deal is if you have an app, you can brand. So like when
Oh,
AT&T calls me, it shows AT&T. When Delta calls me, it shows
yeah.
AT or it shows Delta. But if I didn't have the app, it wouldn't show the brand.
So
Now,
real quick on that, I get
yeah,
a bunch of calls. I ignored
yeah,
them all. I got a call 2 days ago that said American Express. It made me wonder, like, is my account being hacked? What is going
right,
on? I picked up the phone. And if it was Discover that called me, I'm not with Discover. I would have answered the phone because I would have wondered, why is Discover calling me? So I think
sure,
if you're not with, say, you're with Allstate Insurance, and
right.
a client gets a call and they're not with Allstate's, they'll feel like, okay, why is Allstate calling me at this time, even if it's not a new active lead that's calling? So I think this could work really well for new leads and requotes as well. People will
And
pick up and
current
say,
and current
why?
clients.
Yeah, current clients, why is so and so calling me? Yeah.
Well, and I think there's other layers to this. So like I brand as Peachy Insurance and I have my own website. And what we have figured out over time is that people will see Peachy Insurance, that leads that we call, we have no relationship with, and they will call us back on our Google phone number. So our Google listings have different phone numbers, which everybody says don't do for SEO reasons. Hasn't really hurt us. I want to know where these phone calls are coming from. We will call a lead and they will call us back on our Google number, which tells me that they're seeing Peachy or Peachy Insurance. They're Googling us, seeing it, and calling back. So that's building trust. Some people just don't pick up their phone. So that is helping our quote rate. I
I
think
think it's the name, Andrew.
you
It's
know
Pete.
what? In
People are
Georgia,
wondering.
I mean, we walked right into it, like we
Yeah.
walked right into it. But the
Yeah.
other thing I would say is is like having your own website is
Yeah.
really valuable. And I don't know how it is on the farmer side or the state farm side. On the independent side, you definitely want your own website.
Mhm.
But on the Allstate side is that if somebody goes to our Allstate website, so if they go to my Allstate listing and they click get a quote online, that goes to corporate now. So I don't want them seeing Andrew Filar Allstate. I want them to see Peachy Insurance, not Peachy Insurance Allstate, not Peachy Allstate, Peachy Insurance, and go to our website. So they call us or they put a lead form in on our website, not corporate, because we're buying that lead, we're calling, and we're building that brand equity. And so this is why I encourage people to spin up a website, even if it's like a $250 one page website. you can brand yourself as that. So like we can do call branding for people. I think it's 6 cents per call. We make a penny or two on it. It costs about 8 or 9 cents if you go direct because we have so much volume, we get price breaks. I think that call branding is worth 1 to 3% on quote rate. I
It's a lot.
cannot prove that. I think that if I took the time and did the work, I could prove that. But depending on the lead volume, that could be super profitable or it might not be profitable for you, right? So
Yeah. I
branding,
guess
I
the
think,
test would
is
be
a win.
have one way to test would be have a couple of team members calling from branded numbers and a couple of team members who are calling from
Yep.
non-branded numbers and evaluate over a period of 2, 3 months, right?
Right. So we did that when we first signed up. So it's been a few years. It's been 2 or 3 years since we've done that. And, I think we've since added it to everybody. So I think I'd have to take it off, and which is, I think, part of the reticence to do it. What I will tell you is like the biggest lift that we got with branding was the amount of callbacks that people got to their direct line. Callbacks more than doubled, which was great because it's always easier when somebody calls you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the big one. You might not get an answer in that moment. Somebody might look at their caller ID and say, well, I'm I'm on a call right now. I can't answer, but I
Right.
want to return that call. So the moment they're done with whatever they're doing, they return that call. Whereas if it wasn't
Right.
branded, they wouldn't even take the time to call back to see who that was, unless, of course, it's a real estate agent or somebody who gets a lot of inbound calls from various numbers. So they call everybody back. But
Exactly.
most people will probably not call back. Okay. So that's spam remediation. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to get a
Sure.
couple of points from you on hiring an in-house telemarketer. We
Yep.
call it sales development representative, SDR. So we have a few SDRs that work
Yep.
in-house. You have SDRs as well.
Yeah.
Give us some things to think about to determine what a successful SDR. When do you know that your SDR is doing a good job? Think 30 days after they've been hired, they've been trained. What are some metrics that they should be hitting for you to realize that, okay, this is a profitable hire?
Okay. I'll give you two metrics. Well, I'll give you three metrics and one that are numbers, and I'll give you one qualitative metric that's not as easy to measure. So when we think about what makes a good SDR, how do we have somebody who is performing well? So, we've got 2 or 3 SDRs for Peachy. We've got about 40 SDRs through Next Call Club for other agents. Um, and we look at things, pretty standardly across the board. So the first one is call volume. I actually don't want to see them making more than 500 calls. So I want them
Mhm.
in like the 350 to 450 calls per day range. Okay, so that's number one. If they're below that, the effort is not there. If they're above that, the skill is not there. The next thing that we want to see is what is,
Or it's a spam issue.
or it's a spam issue. Great point. But we're remediated. We
Mhm.
check it every single day. Like we have real time alerts. Everything's happening. So we feel pretty confident it's not a spam issue, but for other people, it's a really fair call out. Second, we are going to be looking at like what is their daily transfer volume. We expect a minimum of 15 transfers per day with a goal of 20. It takes a good caller to get to 20 transfers per day. The leads have to be locked in. The call cadence has to be locked in. There can't be any spam. So 20 is really the goal, but 15 is the minimum. Now, if they're not at 15, we basically look at the call volume. Is the call volume where it needs to be, or is it high? That probably means their answer to quote or answer to transfer ratio is below 50 or 60%. They might be in the 30s or the 40s. So we need to train them up. If their answer to transfer ratio is good, we need to get them more calls or more pickups. And so the thought here is that we want to see 350 to 450 calls a day. We want to see at least a 50% answer to transfer ratio with a goal of 70%. Again, hard, but that's the goal we strive for. And then 15 transfers per day or more. The qualitative metric that we look for is how often they're asking us for help on objection handling. So we literally have a Slack channel for all of our callers, and it's called objection handling. How often are they asking for help to overcome objections? If we hear from people a lot, that's a good sign to trying to get better. There's effort, they care. If we have people who are never asking for help or don't think they need coaching, they better have 25 or 30 transfers a day.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what we look for.
I think that's good. And at a different time, we can break down the
Yeah.
math for a SDR because SDRs, it might feel like it's kind of like hiring a service person where you're not really making money off of that person, but they're saving you time. So people look at SDRs in the same way, where you're not really making money off of them, but they're saving you time because you're not having to make outbound calls. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because when you look at an agency with SDRs or with SDRs, if they can even do 10 to 12 transfers per day on new
Right.
leads,
Yeah.
that can be a difference of having a $30,000 premium month for a sales producer or a $50,000 a month. Uh, that 20,000 extra that you write, take, 20% commission and bonus on that. That's $4,000 that you made extra on going from writing 30,000 to 50,000. And that's the difference a SDR could do for you. And this is why we've invested a lot of resources into that. And we can break down the math in a separate video. Okay, so we've covered a lot so far. And for those who want to see the conversation notes, there's a lot of math and numbers that were
Yeah.
broken down. We're going to provide a PDF that will include all that information, as well as Andrew's contact information as well. But last big thing I want to cover here is inbound calls.
Sure.
So one thing that we do in our agency is when a inbound call comes in, and if we miss it, we don't want it to just go to voicemail. We want it to be routed to a different place. And I think you have something similar. Can you talk to what you do in your agency when a call is missed?
Yeah. So you told me what you do, so I won't steal your thunder, and I'll let you tell your audience what you do if you want to. And I think it's clever. I think what we've done is a little bit more old school. So we actually hired a virtual assistant to be our sales traffic controller. So they are basically the last line of defense. If there's an inbound call, they pick up the phone and they stall and transfer it just like an SDR would on an outbound call. And so that has worked very well for us. And this person's job is also to sit in the chat. They have the phone system up and they see who's not on a call. So if there's a transfer available or an inbound call, they're tagging people in the chat to take it. We missing an inbound call is extremely frustrating. I imagine it's super frustrating for you, and it's frustrating because that's money on the phone. That's money on the phone. So we have a VA, we have a human who does it, but we have somebody offshore. I think Franco's out of Mexico.
Mhm. Yeah, as you're talking, I remembered back in the good old days when I worked at Best Buy, I was helping my dad buy insurance, car, home insurance. And it was like 7 o'clock at night. I took a break and I go online and Google to look for a local insurance agent that I can contact. And I put in Google Maps, insurance, home insurance, auto insurance, and everybody's office hours were until 5 or 5:30. Some of them were until 6 o'clock. And I'm thinking, this is madness. How many people just like me who are shopping around after 6 o'clock are looking for help, but
Mm.
they can't get that help? So if I can call an agency and they can gather some basic information, even if they don't get me a quote right away, but
I
at
agree.
least they can get my information and then transfer it to a licensed sales agent who calls me the next day or emails me the next day with the next steps, that would be all I need. So I think these are some other things that we can be thinking about when we're growing our businesses and buying leads. If you're calling a doctor who works crazy hours, that might be your ideal client who is an internet lead, but they're not going to answer the call between 9 and 5. You might have to call them before 9 o'clock or after 5 o'clock. So there's a lot of variables to this game, and you can't really fix all these problems at once. But you got to
Right.
take one step at a time. And I think a good starting point is, if you're buying leads, two things you can do. One is download the quick Excel sheets where you can plug in some basic numbers on the leads that you're buying. Or I should say, and reach out to Next
Yeah.
Call Club and set up a call with them. And you guys do a really good job of doing a Zoom call if needed. You can log
Yeah.
into the dashboard, show you where to click. That way, the agent doesn't have to reach out to the service provider or the lead vendor to get all that data and send it over to you guys. You kind of do it for agents, which I appreciate. So um, I really appreciate this chat today, Andrew. Thank you.
Oh,
Is there
thanks
anything
for
else
having
that
me.
you feel like would be helpful for agency owners who are watching this as we conclude this call?
I think that the people who tend to consume your content, Vlad, are very focused on education. And I think, generally speaking, I would just encourage people to keep trying to learn more about this stuff. Even if it feels like it makes your head hurt, or you're like, man, I'm not. Some people, I hear a lot of people say, I'm not good at math, and the reality is that none of this math is really that hard. You just have to know how to set it up. So keep going. And what I would tell you too is that, internet leads can work and that everybody's results will be different. The key is making sure the results are good for you and your goals. So that's what I would leave everybody with.
Yeah, love that. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for tuning in. If you want to download the notes from this call, follow the link below this video. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.